The first time I heard the house breathing, I was alone in the upstairs hallway at 3 in the morning, barefoot and holding a glass of water I no longer wanted. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the furnace kicking on. It was a slow, deliberate inhale that lifted the floorboards under my toes like lungs swelling beneath skin. Then it let the air out again, warm and sour, the way something does when it's been holding its breath for decades and finally decides you're worth the effort. My name is Mara Caldwell, and 3 months ago I inherited Blackthorn Manor from an uncle I'd met exactly once, at a funeral when I was 7. He'd smelled like pipe smoke and medicine and had pressed a brass key into my palm without explanation. When the time comes, he'd whispered, "Don't sell it. Live in it." Everyone thought he was senile. I thought he was dramatic. Then the lawyers called and told me the house outside the dying mill town of Ashwell, Massachusetts, was mine, along with enough money to keep the lights on if I never turned the heat above 60. I was 31, freshly divorced, and tired of renting apartments that smelled like other people's curry. A free house sounded like an answer. So I moved in on the 1st of September, the day the maples started bleeding red at the edges. The realtor had warned me the place was isolated. That was generous. Blackthorn sat at the end of a dirt road that hadn't been graded since the Clinton administration, surrounded by pines so dense the sun arrived in slivers. The house itself was 3 stories of Victorian Gothic, black shutters, widow's walk, the works. Inside, the wallpaper peeled like sunburned skin and every room smelled faintly of wet plaster and something metallic. I told myself I'd fix it up, sell it, make a profit. I told myself a lot of things. The breathing started on my 4th night. I woke gasping, convinced someone was in the bedroom with me. The air felt thick, used up. I flicked on the lamp. Nothing. Just the usual shadows and the enormous mahogany wardrobe that came with the house because no one could figure out how to get it down the stairs. I opened the window for fresh air. The pines didn't move. There was no wind at all. Yet the room kept swelling and sinking, like a chest under blankets. I slept on the couch that night. The breathing followed me downstairs. By the end of the first week I'd convinced myself it was the old pipes, or settling foundations, or my own bruised heart inventing ghosts because silence is worse than screaming. I'm a rational person. I teach high school biology in Boston, or I did, before the divorce settlement said I had to choose between alimony and my job. I believe in mitochondria and natural selection, not haunted houses. Still, I started leaving lights on. Still, I stopped going into the basement after I found the padlocked door that didn't appear on any floor plan. The padlock was new, shiny, like someone had replaced it recently. October arrived with rain that never quite stopped. The road turned to mud and the mailman gave up. I drove into Ashwell once a week for groceries and cell signal. People stared. They always do when you're the new owner of Blackthorn. The cashier at the market, a woman with a voice like a rusted hinge, leaned over the conveyor belt and said, "Your uncle never kept that house empty long. Always had tenants." I asked what she meant. She just scanned my canned soup and told me to beware of damp. I looked up my uncle online when I had bars. Dr. Leonard Caldwell, disgraced pulmonologist, stripped of his license in 1987 after an experimental trial went wrong. 6 patients died of respiratory failure. The article was cagey about details, but it mentioned unorthodox oxygen therapies and prolonged confinement. There was a grainy photo of him leaving court, eyes like bullet holes. He looked nothing like the sick old man who'd given me the key. That night the house breathed louder, as if angry I'd been digging. I started hearing footsteps in the walls. Not on the floors, in the walls. Soft, wet slaps, like someone walking barefoot through flooded rooms that didn't exist. They followed me from the kitchen to the library to the 3rd-floor ballroom no one had danced in since 1929. I'd stop, and the steps would stop a half-second later, the way an echo lags in a cave. I tore down panels in the parlor looking for hidden passages and found nothing but mouse skeletons and plaster the color of nicotine stains. On October 14 I found the first lung. It was in the pantry, wrapped in oilskin on the top shelf behind mason jars of gray peaches. About the size of a deflated football, black and glossy, still wet. I thought it was a deer heart some hunter had stashed until I saw the bronchi branching like coral and the tiny stitches along the pleural lining, neat as embroidery. Human. Adult. I screamed so hard I tasted blood. Then I wrapped it back up exactly as I'd found it because throwing it away felt like evidence tampering in a crime I hadn't committed yet. I called the Ashwell police. An officer named Hargrove came out, big gut, skeptical eyes. He poked the thing with a pen, sniffed, shrugged. "Kids, He said, medical students from Boston, probably. They do weird shit for initiations. He wouldn't take it with him. Said it wasn't a crime to leave animal parts in your own house. I told him it wasn't an animal. He looked at me like I was the one wasting his time and left. His cruiser got stuck in the mud on the way out. I watched him rocket free while the house exhaled behind me, patient and humid. That night I barricaded my bedroom door with the dresser. The footsteps circled the hallway outside, slow, savoring. Something pressed its weight against the wood, not knocking, just leaning, the way you test if fruit is ripe. The dresser scooted an inch. Then another. I sat on the bed with my grandfather's hunting rifle across my lap, safety off, finger trembling above the trigger. The pressure stopped. The house inhaled so deeply the window panes bowed inward. When it let go, the dresser slid back into place like an obedient dog. I didn't sleep. At dawn I packed a bag and drove to the nearest motel, 40 minutes away. I lasted 6 hours. The silence there was worse. Every breath I took sounded borrowed. By midnight I was back at Blackthorn because at least here the air moved, even if it didn't belong to me. The next discovery was in the attic. I'd avoided the attic because the pull-down stairs stuck in the realtor had warned me about bats. But daylight made me brave. I yanked the cord, climbed into dust thick enough to chew. Trunks, broken chairs, a dressmaker's dummy wearing a rotting wedding dress. And in the far corner, a row of glass tanks the size of coffins, fogged with condensation. 6 of them, 5 empty, 1 occupied. Inside floated a man, not a whole man. From the ribcage up he was perfect, mid-30s, pale, dark hair drifting like seaweed. Below that, nothing but translucent fluid and a thick red tube disappearing into the floor. His chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm with the house. Tubes ran into his arms, his neck, the corners of his mouth. His eyes were open, milky, fixed on the rafters. When I stumbled closer, his pupils tracked me. I vomited on the attic floor. The sound echoed weirdly, wetter than it should have. When I wiped my mouth and looked again, the man's lips had curved into the faintest smile. I fled downstairs and called everyone. Police again, state police, my ex-husband who hung up on me, my mother who cried and told me to burn sage. No one came. The roads had washed out in the rain. I was alone with a house that had a man for a lung. That night the footsteps stopped trying to hide. They marched openly through the hallways, up and down stairs, sometimes 2 sets, sometimes more. Water dripped inside the walls though it hadn't rained in hours. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath plumed. Frost crawled across the inside of the windows in branching patterns that looked exactly like bronchial tubes. I locked myself in the library with the rifle and a bottle of bourbon and waited for morning. Around 2 a.m. the doorknob turned slowly, testing. Then the whispering started. Not words, not at first. Just the soft, papery sound of air moving over vocal cords that hadn't been used in years. It came from everywhere and nowhere, patient as tide. Mara, it said eventually, tasting my name like a new wine. Mara, breathe with us. I fired the rifle through the door. The kick bruised my shoulder. Plaster exploded. The whispering laughed, a sound like drowning. I don't know when I passed out. I woke on the rug with sunlight stabbing through the shutters and every bone in my body aching like I'd run a marathon. The library smelled of gunpowder and wet leaves. There was a handprint on the inside of the window, palm against the glass as if someone had stood there watching me sleep. It was too large to be mine. I climbed to the attic prepared to smash the tank, drag the poor bastard out, call an ambulance, something. The occupied tank was empty. Fluid still swirled inside, pink and cloudy, but the man was gone. The other 5 tanks now had names taped to the glass in my uncle's handwriting. The first 4 held shadows curled like fetuses. The 5th was labeled Mara. My name, in the same spidery script he'd used on my birthday cards when I was a child. I lost the next 2 days. I remember fragments. Driving too fast on back roads, screaming into voicemail, buying bleach and gasoline and matches at a hardware store where the clerk wouldn't meet my eyes. I remember standing in the attic with a crowbar, ready to destroy everything, and finding the tanks already drained, lids open, sheets of plastic inside still warm and wet. I remember the house breathing faster, excited. On the 3rd morning I woke in my own bed though I hadn't climbed the stairs. The sheets were damp, my lungs burned like I'd been sprinting. When I coughed, something flecked my palm, dark and fibrous. I stared at it too long. Then I went looking for the man from the tank. I found him in the basement, behind the padlocked door I'd never opened. The lock was gone. The door stood ajar, exhaling cold metallic air. Stairs descended into darkness that felt thick, like walking into water. I took a flashlight and the rifle and went down because running hadn't worked and burning the place down felt too much like mercy. The basement was larger than the house. Impossible corridors of brick stretched away, lit by bare bulbs that flickered in sequence like a heartbeat. Hospital gurneys lined the walls, straps dangling. On each gurney lay a body, naked, chest open like a book, lungs removed. Some cavities were empty, some held glistening black organs that pulsed on their own. The air was so saturated with oxygen it made me dizzy, euphoric. At the far end stood my uncle. He looked exactly like the court photo, 30 years younger than when he'd died. He wore a white coat over pajamas, sleeves rolled high, arms bloody to the elbow. The man from the tank knelt at his feet, head bowed, chest cavity yawning open and empty. Tubes ran from the cavity into the floor like umbilical cords. "You kept me waiting, Mara," my uncle said. His voice was gentle, disappointed. "I gave you every chance to understand." I raised the rifle. My hands shook so badly the barrel waved. "You're dead," I said. "Technically." He smiled the way he had at the funeral, fond and distant. "Death is a ventilation problem. I fixed it." He gestured, and the kneeling man lifted his head. His eyes were clear now, hazel, terrified. A name tag still clung to the skin of his chest. Subject for donor. He tried to speak. Only bubbles came, pink and thick. "Blackthorn was never a house," my uncle continued. "It's a body, my masterpiece. 6 lungs, 1 for each wing, sharing circulation through the pipes, the ducts, the chimneys. The structure metabolizes. It dreams. But it was missing its final graft." He looked at me with pride that made my stomach flip. "Family matches best." I pulled the trigger. The bullet struck him center mass. He didn't flinch. The hole filled itself with red threads that knit together like time-lapse moss. "Guns are crude," he said. "Breathe with me instead." The house inhaled. Every bulb flared white. The kneeling man convulsed, ribs spreading wider. Something moved inside his cavity, black and wet and unfolding. It looked at me and I recognized the shape of my own lungs, larger, darker, perfected. I ran. Up the impossible stairs, through corridors that bent back on themselves, doors slamming inches from my heels. The footsteps were inside my chest now, matching my pulse. I burst into the foyer and the front door was gone, just wallpaper where it used to be. Windows showed only brick. I screamed until my throat tore and the house drank the sound and gave it back as a sigh of pleasure. I don't know how long I ran through rooms that multiplied like cancer. Eventually I collapsed in the ballroom under a chandelier dripping with dust. The wedding dress from the attic lay spread across the floor, waiting. My uncle stood over me. "No hurry now. You'll be the crown," he said softly. The others were strangers. Their tissue fought. "Yours will sing." He knelt and pressed 2 fingers to my neck, feeling for the carotid the way a chef tests meat. I tried to bite him. He only smiled. "Breathe out, Mara, all the way. Don't fight the vacuum." I did the opposite. I sucked air until my ribs creaked, greedy, defiant. For a moment the house faltered, overinflated. Bulbs popped overhead. Plaster rained. My uncle's face twisted in surprise. I rolled away, scrambled across the ballroom floor, and threw myself at the tall windows. They shattered outward into night that smelled of pine and freedom. I fell 2 stories into the overgrown rose garden, thorns tearing clothes and skin. Behind me the house roared, a sound of storm and birth and dying all at once. I ran barefoot down the mud road while lights flared in every window of Blackthorn, bright as alveoli flooding with oxygen. I ran until the road ended at the main highway and a truck driver found me bleeding and babbling about lungs. He took me to a hospital in Worcester where they sedated me and called it psychosis brought on by carbon monoxide poisoning. They found high levels of CO in my blood. They kept me for 10 days. The official report says Blackthorn Manor burned to the ground the night I escaped. Arson, probably kids. Nothing left but foundation and ash. They never found human remains. Just some animal tissue, too degraded to identify. I still have the scars on my back from the rose thorns. They look like branching trees. Sometimes, in the new apartment I rent under a different name, I wake at 3 a.m. certain the walls are swelling. I hold my breath until I pass out because letting it go feels like invitation. Doctors say it's anxiety. They give me little white pills that taste like nothing. Last week I received a brass key in the mail. No return address. It's old, heavy, familiar. Last night I dreamed of pine trees in a house that breathed my name. This morning the building superintendent knocked to ask why my radiator keeps hissing even when the heat's off. He stood in the doorway sniffing the air and said, "Smells like a hospital in here." I smiled and told him I'd open a window. I haven't decided yet whether to use the key or swallow it. But my lungs feel heavier every day, like they're making room.